remember here that Peter's audience at the time is, they're going through some trials, but what they don't realize yet is that the trials are about ready to get a whole lot worse. Okay? And so we don't undergo physical suffering for our faith each day, but there are definitely people in the world today that are under constant threat for believing in Jesus. And so, the physical threat of suffering isn't something that we go through, but it is something that God's people, even today, still go through. And so this is a message of hope even to them. And it's something that can be comforting to us, even going forward, even when we're not going through intense physical suffering, when we are enduring any kind of suffering, this is still something that we can take hope in. And then Peter wants his audience to remain a holy light even in the midst of that suffering. So even though we might be undergoing trials, even though we might be undergoing some really terrible things, Peter wants us to still remain alive. All right? And that we need to desire to grow in Christ like a baby craves milk. We just make this transition from one life to the next. And so we need to make sure that we're doing like a baby does and taking in everything of God that we can to grow and develop and switch into that new life. So we'll go ahead and get started reading from 1 Peter 3. I remember that we started with Weston last week, so we'll start over here with Maddie and work our way around. 2 verses each should be good. 4, 7, 9. Yeah, we'll be fine with 2 verses each.
Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives, when they see the purity and reverence of your lives.
Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as
elaborate
hairstyles and wearing gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, unfading beauty of a gentle, quiet spirit, which is a great work on sight.
This is how the holy women of old made themselves beautiful. They put their trust in God and accepted the authority of their husband. For instance, Sarah obeyed her husband Abraham and called him her master. You are her daughters when you do what is right without fear of what your husband might do. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as her with you and the gracious gift of wives, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Finally, all of you be like-minded and sympathetic. Love one another, be compassionate and helpful.
Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit the blessing. For whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongue from evil and their lips from deceitful speech.
Turn away from evil and do good. Search for peace and work to maintain it. The eyes of the Lord watch over those who do right, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the Lord turns his face against those who do evil.
What's going to harm you if you are eager to do good? Even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against you, your good behavior in Christ, may be ashamed of their slander.
For it is better, if it is God's will, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. For Christ also suffered once for our sins, the righteousness of our unrighteousness, to bring you to God. He hath put to death in body and made alive in spirit.
In which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey. When God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through water.
And this water symbolizes baptism, now saves you also. Not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear science toward God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven, is at God's right hand, with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him.
Alrighty. Anything that you guys saw in there that was something you liked, something confusing, you had a question on? Everybody good? Alright.
Hold on.
Yep.
And this is a symbol of blasphemy saved also. Not the removal of dirt by the body is a pledge of clear from perseverance towards the God. It saves the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Which verse was that again?
It's verse 21.
21. Okay. Yeah. Alright. Anything in particular caught your eye about that?
The way that it said, it's not the removal of dirt from the body.
Yeah. There's a whole lot more going on. Good. Anybody else? Okay. Alright, well, we'll go ahead and get started then. And the first part here is wives and husbands, verses 1 through 6. So, the first thing that we need to look at when we're looking at these passages is that there's a clear difference between, like in the text here, Peter is primarily talking to people where one spouse, both spouses started off not being members of the church, not being believers, and then one of them does accept Christ and the other hasn't yet. Okay? Now, these rules do work for where both have accepted Christ, but it's still rules that need to be shared. But that's the primary person that this passage is looking at. Okay? Now, just because you're talking about a couple where one person is not a believer and the other person is, it does not mean that for you all, since you all have started off life believing, that you should pursue somebody who is not a believer and then sit there and go, okay, no, it'll be fine. All right? There are people who do that thinking that it's okay, but really as believers, you need to pursue somebody. If you're going to pursue somebody romantically, pursue someone romantically that is already a believer. Okay? You might have disagreements on a few things, but make sure that before you get engaged, the key elements are in union. Okay? So that's one thing to point out. The other thing to really take note of before we go too far is when Peter starts off here, he says, wives in the same way. Now, who was Peter talking about before he started talking about wives and husbands? You guys can look in your Bible if you need to see. So this is in 1 Peter 3. Who does Peter talk to right before this? Servants and masters, right? So, some people are going to look at that and immediately think he's trying to say that women should be slaves to their husbands. Is that what he's saying? Don't shake your head again. I thought you were shaking. You timed that just right. Is Peter trying to say that women should be slaves to their husbands? No. No. Okay, that is not what he's saying. All right. You got to remember that he starts off this whole submission thing by talking about everybody needs to submit to the governing authorities. Slaves need to submit to their masters. Wives need to submit to their husbands, okay? And so when he says in the same way, it's not in reference to the slaves, it's just in reference to the continued theme of submission, okay? So, some people might get really confused about that and throw a fit. There's no reason to, okay? That's not what he's trying to say. And remember, we talked about this last week when we first started with 1 Peter. The similarities between what Peter writes on this stuff and what Paul writes are really similar, okay? So when Paul says wives submit to your husbands, husbands love your wives, everybody submit to everybody. Peter's saying the same thing too. Okay? He's absolutely saying to the husband, he's going to say to the husbands, you need to love your wives. And even though he doesn't explicitly say, he doesn't make it as explicit as Paul does, he is going to bring it up too, that everybody needs to submit to each other, because that's what Christ did for us. All right? So, getting into it here, one of the first things he says, that they may be won over without word. What's Paul saying there? What's Paul saying? Or Peter. I said Paul, didn't I? What's Peter saying?
Talking about fighting.
Kind of, yeah. It's along those lines. Is Peter saying that when you're in the home, ladies, when you girls get married, is he telling you that when you're in the home, is he trying to say, hush, woman? No, what's he saying? Yeah, and remember what the circumstances are, okay? He's talking to a group of people where they, like in particular to the wives, where they have gone from being, pagans, non-believers, whatever, to being Christ followers. Are they going to be excited about that? Yes, we should all be excited about the transition to becoming a follower of Jesus. Okay? That should be something that makes us all excited. When we become a follower, should we be so excited about it that we're trying to talk to others about it?
Definitely.
Yes. Okay? Now, women were going to especially feel liberated, and so as they're talking to their husbands about this, was the possibility going to arise that they were going to start arguing about their faith and trying to convince them through an argument, and it might get a little bit belligerent? Is that a possibility? Yeah. Okay. Because and it's not to sit there and try and just say that the woman is only going to do this. It's just a matter of when we get really passionate about something and we feel like the other person, guys included, the other person isn't responding, we tend to get a little bit more frustrated about it. We start to, get into an argument about it. And so when Peter's saying that your husbands may be won over without words, his point isn't just to sit there and say, hush, woman. His point is to sit there and go, all right, make sure that you are living your lives in such a way that they can see it through your actions. You can share your faith. He's not trying to tell them don't share your faith, but he doesn't want them to sit there and be belligerent about it. Okay? And because, for anybody, that could be something that becomes an issue. Okay? Alright, so the next thing he says to the women is, your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. And so he's saying that your beauty should be godly beauty, attitude, faithfulness, this kind of stuff. Alright? So, what is Peter not saying?
You're ugly.
Peter is definitely not sitting there trying to say, none of you ladies should ever in any way try to attempt to be attractive. I don't care if you're staying at home or trying to go out. You need to wear Cheeto-stained sweats with your hair, messed up like you just woke up. Okay? That is not what he's saying. Okay? And I specifically want to point out, he specifically says, like Sarah. Okay? What do we know about Sarah? Abraham goes to Egypt. Pharaoh sees Sarah and he goes, what? Hey girl, hey. He's interested, alright? So, somehow Sarah is attractive. Okay? And he's sitting there going, alright, I want to take you home. Alright? And Abraham just kind of messes up and goes, yeah, she's my sister, and lets her go. And the sad thing is, this isn't the only time that that's going to happen to Sarah. Huh? Yeah, it is terrible. In fact, the second time it happens, when it's the Philistine king that takes Sarah in, he actually specifically goes above and beyond for Sarah's benefit and says, "You are vindicated here." Okay. And I mean, he takes care of her, makes sure that she's taken care of, and that Abraham's embarrassed by his actions. Okay, Esther, right? King Xerxes has Queen Vashti deposed. He sends her away. She's never to enter his presence again. And then afterwards, because he was drunk while he was doing it, Xerxes realized that this was a terrible mistake. And so, how does he respond? What's his next step? You guys remember? He listens to the advice of his advisors, and they tell him, bring in all these virgins from all across the kingdom, and then you can choose one of them to be your wife, and the rest will just remain in your harem. Terrible decision, but that's what he does. So he brings all these women in, and then the eunuchs are telling the girls, okay, you guys can do whatever beauty treatments you want. All right? You can do whatever beauty treatments you want in the time that you're preparing to see the king, and then you see the king, and then he'll decide whether he wants to see you or not. Right? All the rest of them are doing their thing. Esther says, I'm just going to take the advice of the main eunuch here and do what he tells me to do. And she goes in to see the king, and is Xerxes concerned about her attitude or her faithfulness? Is Xerxes the kind of guy that says, oh, she's got great personality? No, Xerxes is looking at one thing, okay? And so it's not like she was just, showing up and be like, oh, I woke up this morning, I got that thing with Xerxes today. Well, yeah, this is all right, and just walks in. No, she looks good, okay?
Hey, girl.
Ruth, when she shows up to Boaz, Boaz definitely loves the fact that Ruth is so faithful and all this other stuff, but is Boaz only looking at her faithfulness? No, she's attracted to him. Like, he's really excited when he finds out she's interested in him. When she shows up at the threshing floor and she's all, hey, I want you to take me in. I want you to marry me. He's all, I am really excited because you could have gone after some of the younger guys and you're choosing to come to me. So this is awesome. Okay? So he is not in any way trying to sit there and just say, if you're, getting gussied up or anything else, then that's wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. No, what is he saying? Yeah. What should your focus be on? I keep looking over at the guys, but this is a really focused conversation for the girls. What is Peter saying to the women? Is he saying that your focus should be on spending hours and hours upon hours fixing your hair and getting, the right dress and all the right, necklaces and everything else, and then just the right spots, and then spending all this money on everything else? Is that what he's saying? No. But he's not saying that you shouldn't do that at all right? If you girl, again, I still like doing this. If you girls decide that you want to go get a manicure, that's not wrong. If you decide you want to go get your hair taken care of, treat yourself to a day, don't sit there and feel like, oh no, I can't do that. No, that's not what he's saying. Alright? But your focus should be on God. Your focus should be on making sure that that's taken care of first and foremost. Okay? And this is the biggest thing that Peter's trying to get across. Especially in our culture today, people are going to read through that and they're going to start taking all these different directions out of it, of Peter sitting there trying to make all these things that he's not saying. All right. So it's just something good to keep in mind. So when he says this about your beauty should not come from outward adornment, etc., etc., he is not trying to take away from the physical nature of it. Okay. There's plenty of people in the Bible that had a physical attraction to each other because of the way that they took care of themselves and the way that they showed themselves. All right. Song of Songs is a perfect example. Most of that book is the wife and the husband directly telling each other, hey, he's pretty. Okay, that is most of Song of Songs right there. The other, Song of Songs is either, hey, you look good, or hey, we're about ready to do this thing, and then the author kind of goes off in the other direction because the rest of that is reserved for a special place. All right, and so that's Song of Songs. So.
It's good to point out though about marriage. The pretty doesn't always, it doesn't happen every day.
No, and yes, no, I meant to bring that up. Yeah, it's not a way of sitting there saying that you're expected to look this way for your husbands all the time. You know, I mean, obviously there's going to be days when both parties are going to just be like, whatever, I'm roaming around the PJs today, and you can live with it. You know?
Well, I mean, I need to point out that like you talk about you like my hair long, and that's a good way to point. I like it short.
Yep.
I like you to make sure that you're shaved before you go anywhere. And sometimes you just don't care. But I think
working on it.
I know. But I think it's good to point out that in marriage, some things that you don't want to necessarily do or you don't like doing it for the spouse with love. And
yeah.
I think stuff like that is okay because it shows respect.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. So we're clear on that. We'll go ahead and move forward. So then he talks to the husbands, the way that they should treat their wives. All right, so now when he goes into the husbands, he specifically says, husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect as the weaker partner. Oops. All right. So that's a verse that's always kind of thrown me for a little bit because it's just, I've sat there and seen girls that can deadlift more than my body weight, okay? And so I'm like, weaker? Hang on, let me struggle to get my 5-gallon water jug in the car, and then I'm going to pick my donut back up and eat it, okay? So I struggle sometimes with this idea of Peter saying weaker, and so I thought, okay, maybe that's just the way that it's been translated. Maybe the original text doesn't actually suggest that phrase. So I was really wanting to look into that. And I'm sure most of you girls here could even still outrun me. You know, if we were to try and do a race, you guys would probably be finishing, and I'd be just, maybe walking up to the quarter-mile mark or whatever, panting all the way. So, anyways, so I was wanting to look into this to see what the original language says. And the guy that I was reading from actually says that in the original language, it does mean its intent is for the physical nature of strength, okay? But here's the thing, and here's what I thought he made a really good point on, is this. He says, therefore, as the stronger of the two marriage partners, the husband ought to shoulder the heavier burdens, protect his wife, and provide for her according to her needs. Although the husband claims authority, he nevertheless honors, sustains, and loves his wife. We detect an apparent contradiction. The physically weaker wife submits to her husband's authority, yet she receives the honor and respect. And so it's as if Peter's intentionally using this physical nature of the word weak to point. I mean, it's like he was intentionally trying to use this. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't trying to be insulting or anything else. Generally speaking, guys will be stronger than or have more physical whatever than a lot of girls. But it's not going to be the case in every circumstance, all right? But Peter's not worried about that. What Peter's worried about is the idea that, as the weaker, but you're going to submit to them. That even though we're stronger, the husbands are going to submit to the wives as well, to show honor and respect. Okay? And so this is something that you're going to see continuously throughout the Bible, that God never intended the husband-wife relationship the man-woman relationship to ever be something where one person abused the other one or one person took advantage of the other one. That's not something that God condones in any relationship. And so he's specifically trying to say, you're to love each other. You're to support one another. You're to take care of one another. That's the relationship that you should have. That's the relationship that you should desire. And because this is specifically how Christ has lived for you. The church is supposed to be the bride, the wife of Christ, and we submit to him. And even in our submission to him, he loved us enough to die for us. And so guys, as you guys are pursuing relationships, and as you all are looking towards the future and marriage and everything else, I know that most of you guys, that's really far down the line. That's totally fine. All right? Take your time. Both of you, take your time in pursuing relationships. But when you do enter into that relationship, guys, make sure that you're loving your partner and loving them and submitting to them as well. So the other thing he points out to the husbands is this. He says, heirs with you of the gracious gift of life. He says, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect so that nothing will hinder your prayers. How's a bad relationship with your spouse going to hinder your prayers? Yeah, like negatively affect. No, that's fine. How is a bad relationship with your wife or your spouse, girls, you can answer this too, how's a bad relationship with your spouse going to affect your prayer life or your faith life?
It's not at peace.
Yeah. Jesus specifically calls us to be what? Starts with that. Peace.
What?
Starts with peace.
Oh.
Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. Okay? Because peacemakers specifically pursue peace even when things are bad. Alright? So yeah, if you are having this bad relationship with your spouse, are you pursuing peace? No. And sometimes this can be the case where one person is trying to pursue peace and the other person is just absolutely not interested. Okay? I've known a lot of couples where one person was trying to make it work and then the other person just did not care and they just walked away. Alright? So sometimes that will be the case. But generally speaking, both partners need to be pursuing peace. Okay? John even specifically says this in his letter. Whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen can't love God whom they have not seen. Alright? So if you're not loving your spouse, then you're not loving your neighbor as yourself. If you can't treat your spouse right, you're not really treating God right. And so this is why whenever you get into a marital relationship or you're pursuing the marital relationship, you've got to make sure that when you guys get into an argument, you nip it in the bud. You take care of it. Discussion, excuse me. When you get into a discussion, you nip it in the bud, okay? And you talk it out. And sometimes it means being willing to sacrifice for the other person. Sometimes it's going to mean a mutual understanding. Sometimes as you're going through that mutual understanding, you realize that both of you weren't saying what you thought you were saying, and you get it all figured out. But in any case, it's this mutual discussion to show love to one another so that you can continue to keep that positive, holy relationship that it's intended to be. And remember as well that just like we were saying here, where that Peter could have been was likely speaking to wives whose husbands weren't followers, this could just as easily be targeted towards husbands whose wives weren't followers. Now, if they go from treating their wives as just an object that they own, basically, to what Peter is calling them to do, how do you think that's going to affect the wife? How do you think that's going to affect her?
Really.
I mean, she's going to be really interested in understanding what has happened to her husband that has caused this change, and she's going to be interested in doing that more herself and making those changes herself. Alright, so the next thing here is mutual submission. We're not going to go through 8 through 22 this morning, obviously, but I wanted to point out the start of this section because he really focuses in on showing love to each other even in the face of aggression. Okay? When somebody comes at us aggressively, our natural tendency is to respond like what? Respond how? Aggressively. Alright? That's just the natural tendency. And Peter's specifically reminding them, you have turned away from that kind of life. You've been made new. You're a new life. You're a new creation. You're not to live like that anymore. If somebody comes at you aggressively, you're now to show them what?
Love.
Love. You're to show love, compassion, forgiveness, mercy. These are the things that you're to respond with now. So if somebody starts verbally attacking you or physically assaulting you for your faith, you are to respond in love. We talked about this a little bit on Wednesday too, and obviously there's points where you have to make some separation there for safety purposes. But you're not, even when you do that, you're not responding in aggression. Okay? There's a difference in responding in love and making sure that you're still taking care of yourself. Okay? The last thing I want to show you guys is this. I think we looked at this video when we were going through Luke, but in the videos for Luke, they specifically show how Jesus brings in a tax collector and a zealot as part of his 12 apostles. A tax collector worked for who? Roman government. A zealot thought what of the Roman government? Hated him. I'm going to kill him. Alright? And so Jesus puts the two together in a room and says, ha-ha! Okay? And I love this scene because right before this, it shows Judas the Zealot and Matthew the tax collector supporting each other. And then this scene right here, the shadow is that of a Roman soldier. And it's specifically showing like the Romans marching past him, and his old lifestyle said, I'm going to kill him. But you can see that he's sitting there looking at his sword and he's saying, this is the old way. And in the video he drops his sword and realizes that it's time to live the new way. It's time to give up that old life and serve God the way that he's intended to. So as God's people, we're supposed to reflect the submissive life of Christ even in the face of suffering. And that's what Peter's going to continue to try and get across, is this idea of living a submissive, loving life even in the face of aggression and suffering and trials. And we talked about that in Ecclesiastes, that that's the only life worth living, is obedience to God. Alright, so tonight we've got the back to school bash. I'd really like it if you guys could be here at 1 o'clock to help fill the water balloons. We've got some of the ones where it's just the simple plug it into the faucet and go from there. But we've got some more that are like you actually have to fill it up in the sink and do all that, so it's going to take a little bit. And then make sure that you bring a change of clothes and a towel for the water wars, or for the color war, okay?
Color war?
Seriously, I'm having like a reaction to that now when I hear that. At 4 o'clock, we're going to stop prepping for the color war. We're going to send some of you guys out to help Buddy cook. We'll send some of you guys over to the kitchen to help get the drinks and the table and everything else set up and go from there. Next Sunday, we will not have a youth activity. Just hang with your parents or go do something on your own, okay? Like I was telling some of you guys the other day, you don't have to have something scheduled for you guys to go do something. If you guys decide as a group you want to hit up Pizza Hut, do it. Alright? Love you guys. I want you guys to remember that and that you're awesome. So.
You guys want to see my cup?
You're cut?
Ted,
Yeah.
I won't be there at 1.
Okay.
I will come there right after.
Okay, sounds good. All right.
We're setting up for 4-H.
Okay, sounds good.
We're stopping down at here right now.
Okay.
And what time does it start again?
Evening starts at 5, and then the color war cookout should start at 6. Yeah.
No, not even. Not even. No, you saw what he did.
Alright, then I did. I don't care. Not a game.
Already